The first time Soren Veth woke up on the morning of May 8th, he didn't know it was going to be the last day of his life. The second time he woke up, he did. The third time, he'd already stopped being surprised by it. He lay on the metal bunk in Bunk Bay 7 of Ore Processing Station Call Doroth and listened to the shift bell ring, the same 3 descending tones it always rang, a minor chord that somebody on the original construction crew had probably thought sounded official. The sound entered his ears and settled into the space behind his sternum like something swallowed wrong. He knew what came next. Varek in the bunk above would exhale through his nose. Not quite a snort, not quite a sigh, something in between that Soren had never heard anyone else make. And then drop his legs over the side and sit there in the gray light for exactly 4 seconds before his feet hit the floor. 4 seconds. Soren had counted 11 times. The exhale came. The 4-second pause, the feet on the floor. Same day, Varek said. Same day, Soren confirmed. They didn't look at each other. There was a rhythm to it already. The way there's a rhythm to a scar you've stopped picking at. The Vreth had trapped them here, in this day, in this station, in this loop that turned on itself like a gear stripped of its teeth, spinning and engaging nothing. And in the beginning, they had screamed about it. In the beginning, they had run down the corridors, put their fists through things, tried the emergency bay doors, tried the comm array, tried every technical solution that 2 trained survey technicians could think of. All of it dissolved at midnight like salt in water. And they woke up here, the shift bell ringing, the 3 descending notes. Varek dropped to the floor and pulled on his station gray coveralls. He was a large man, Varek Osman, the kind of large that suggested a childhood involving physical work and not enough food. His hands were wide and square, with knuckles that had healed crooked from at least one bad break before Soren had known him. He moved with a deliberate economy, no gesture wasted, the product of years working in confined extraction environments where carelessness cost oxygen or limbs. He had been in a Vreth compliance prison for 8 months before Soren had met him at the concert. That was another life. Now, that was a year ago or 100 years ago, depending on how you counted, and whatever they'd done to him there had not broken him, but it had rearranged something. The warmth in him came slower. It came, but slower. "What do we try today?" Varek said. It wasn't a question. He said it the way people say things they've been saying so long the question mark has worn off. Soren stared at the ceiling. The ceiling of Bunk Bay 7 had a stress crack in the polymer plating that ran from the light housing to the ventilation grill in a shape that reminded him, vaguely, of a river delta seen from orbit. He'd stared at it long enough that it had become a kind of companion. He'd named it, in his head. He wasn't going to tell Varek at that. "I want to watch the morning shift go down," Soren said. Varek looked at him. "We've tried stopping the cageway accident," Soren said. "We've tried the secondary entrance. We've tried warning the crew boss. We've tried getting off the station. We've tried the Vreth quarters on level 4. He paused. "I want to stop trying to fix it and just watch." A long silence. The station groaned around them, thermal expansion, or pressure fluctuation, or whatever a station does when it's not quite properly maintained by an occupying force that views structural integrity as a courtesy, rather than a requirement. "Watch," Varek said. "Watch, memorize, I want to know their names." Varek was quiet for another moment. Then he laced up his work boots, the same way he always did, left foot first, 3 pulls on the inner tongue, and said, "All right." The corridor outside was already filling with the morning shift. 43 miners on call Doroth, plus station support staff, plus the 6 Vreth garrison that watched them with the particular incurious attention of a predator that has already eaten. The Vreth did not look like anything Soren's childhood nightmares had prepared him for. They were tall, 2.5 meters. Some of them, with an exoskeletal structure that gave their movements a precision that seemed almost mechanical, joints that articulated in too many planes, heads that were broad and low, and set on necks that could swivel 200 degrees without the body turning. Their eyes were multiple, faceted, arranged in a shallow arc across the upper face, and they registered everything with the same flat, comprehensive attention. They communicated in a frequency range partly below human hearing, so in practice they appeared to move in silence, and the commands that made people flinch and comply seemed to come from nowhere. They had occupied 12 human extraction stations in this belt. They had not explained why. They didn't appear to feel that an explanation was owed. Soren pressed himself against the corridor wall to let the morning stream of miners pass. He had his small data pad, the one that reset like everything else at midnight, but that he'd learned, by the 40-something iteration, to load manually each morning with the notes from the previous cycle. He'd figured out that the pad's local chip didn't reset if he kept it powered continuously, running a maintenance cycle. Varric had spent 2 days working out the power drain calculation, so the battery didn't die mid-loop. It was the most complex thing they'd successfully preserved across iterations. 23 days of handwritten notes in the pad's basic text editor, cramped and abbreviated. A private language built out of urgency and limited screen space. Day 44, he wrote it at the top. The first miner to pass him was a woman named Fen Dalros. He knew this because on day 19, he'd gotten close enough during the shift assembly to read the name tag on her suit, before the Vreth shift watcher had moved him back. Fen Dalros was approximately 40, with dark hair pulled back severely, and she walked with a slight forward lean that might have been habit from years of low-sailing tunnels, or might have been an old injury, probably lumbar. She never looked up in the corridor. This morning, every morning, she carried a canteen in her left hand that she didn't drink from until exactly the moment the cageway doors opened. Some kind of personal ritual, the canteen touching her lips at threshold. Soren wrote it down. Behind her 3 men he'd been gradually naming, internally, until he could learn their real names, as Redbeard, Shoulder Scar, and Quiet. Quiet was young, maybe 22, with an expression of habitual wariness that had probably been installed at an early age, and never successfully uninstalled. Quiet walked with Redbeard in a way that suggested old friendship. Close but not touching, calibrated to each other's pace, the small navigation of shared movement that you only develop over years. Redbeard said something short and Quiet half-smiled, the particular half-smile of someone who has heard the joke before and still finds it worth acknowledging. Soren wrote, RP plus Q, 10 plus years maybe. Morning joke, same one? Varric appeared at his shoulder and they both watched the stream of miners without speaking. They'd done enough of these cycles that they'd developed their own communications of small gestures. Varric's chin tip meaning, note that. Soren's flat hand meaning, already have it. They moved along the corridor behind the last of the morning shift with the practiced unobtrusiveness of men who have learned that seeming purposeful is safer than seeming lost. At the cageway, the 6 cages hung on their cables in a row like bells waiting to ring. The cage operator was a man named Dulev. Soren had learned this from a document he'd photographed on day 31, a shift roster pinned to the supervisor's board. And Dulev was the kind of man whose competence was expressed entirely through the absence of anything unnecessary. He operated the cages with the controlled precision of someone who had internalized the equipment so completely that emergency and routine looked identical from the outside. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He checked each locking mechanism twice, the same sequence, no variation. On day 44, Soren watched Dulev check the mechanism on cage 3. He had seen it many times before. The mechanism on cage 3 had a micro-fatigue fracture in the primary latch housing. He'd identified it on day 22. By day 25, he'd confirmed that at 11:14 station time, exactly 47 minutes into the morning shift, cage 3 would drop 11 meters before the secondary catch engaged, injuring 3 miners and killing 1. He'd tried to stop it 9 different ways. He'd tried warning Dulev. He'd tried tampering with the cage himself. He tried pulling the miners out of the queue before they loaded. Every time the loop's geometry had redirected the outcome, a different cage failed, a different sequence, the same result. The accident was stitched into the day like load-bearing structure. The day held itself up with it. This morning Soren did not try to stop it. He watched Dulev's hands on the latch housing. He watched the precise, unhurried double-check. He photographed it on the pad, 3 shots the sequence. He wrote, Dulev knows, has known a long time. Checks it twice because he already knows it's failing, and hasn't found a way to report it or replace it without the Vreth interpreting maintenance requests as delay tactics and removing him from position. He does what he can in the margin the loop gives him. He checks it twice. Soren stood there with that thought sitting in him like something dropped from height. Varric read over his shoulder, said nothing, then put his hand briefly on Soren's shoulder blade. Just wait, just contact, the kind of acknowledgement that doesn't need language, and after a moment took it away. At 10C the station-wide address system clicked on, and the day's compliance meeting began. The Vreth garrison commander's voice came through the speakers in the particular harmonics that the translation matrix rendered as flat, textured with overtones, not quite organic. It announced production quotas. It announced that May 8th was designated a high extraction rotation in honor of the Vreth Expansion Compact's 42nd year, It used the word honor and the word compact in the same way a wall uses bricks, structurally, without meaning. Every iteration, the miners assembled in the common hall as required. Every iteration, they stood in their rows with an attention that was perfectly calibrated. Enough compliance to avoid triggering enforcement. Not enough enthusiasm to suggest cooperation. Soren had spent several iterations studying their faces during this ritual and had developed a detailed internal taxonomy of the different ways human beings express defiance at subthreshold levels. The slight upward pressure of the jaw. The controlled blankness that is not emptiness but its opposite, a deliberate evacuation to protect what's inside. The small muscular shifts of people choosing, consciously, not to react to things that deserve reaction. Fen Dalros, in the third row, stood with her canteen at her side. Empty now, she'd drunk from it at the cageway, the ritual complete, and looked at a point approximately 8 inches above the address speaker, as if something important was happening in the middle distance. Her face was entirely unreadable, which meant it was entirely legible. To someone who'd watched it enough times, Soren wrote, FD, eyes off the speaker. Not defiance, not submission. Absence. She goes somewhere else. This is how she survives it. After the compliance meeting came the station's administrative cycle, supply reconciliation, the Vreth garrison's rotation documentation, the midday break, and then, at 14:30, the event that Soren had come to think of as the pivot, the pay desk robbery. He'd spent 8 iterations trying to understand it and had arrived at a picture that was probably incomplete but felt true. A man named Serev worked station accounting. Serev had, over the course of the occupation, been quietly diverting portions of the minor salary disbursements. Not to himself, Soren had eventually concluded, but to a network of some kind off-station, the nature of which he couldn't determine. On May 8th, every May 8th, the Vreth discovered this diversion. The discovery triggered an enforcement action. The enforcement action, carried out by 2 garrison members in the narrow corridor outside the accounting office, killed a station security officer named Ryabenko, who had been in the wrong place with the wrong instinct. He'd moved toward the sound of the altercation rather than away from it, and grievously injured Serev. The security officer Ryabenko was 26. He had a photograph on the inside of his locker door, which Soren had managed to see once, briefly. A woman and a child, both squinting into sun, a body of water behind them, somewhere with weather. He walked his corridors with a slight rolling gait that turned out, on close observation, to be him favoring his left knee. He had a habit of humming, short, tuneless fragments, the same few bars repeated, something that seemed to come from a place below conscious choice. On the mornings when the common hall was not too loud with machinery, you could hear him making his rounds. Soren had watched Ryabenko die 6 times now. Each time it took a different precise shape, because each time Soren's interference had altered the geometry slightly without changing the outcome, the way water takes the shape of whatever channel it finds. He'd tried shouting. He'd tried physically intercepting. He'd tried reaching Serev before the garrison did. The Vreth were faster than he'd anticipated and operated with a collective coordination that made individual intervention essentially useless. To stop one was to find 2 already behind you. The loop had infinite patience and only one answer. On day 44, Soren arrived at the accounting corridor at 14:22 and stood with his back against the wall and did not try to stop anything. He watched Ryabenko come around the corner on his rolling gait, humming. The fragments of the tune were the same ones they always were. Soren closed his eyes and listened to them, really listened. For the first time in 6 iterations of trying to outmaneuver the outcome, he wrote them down as best he could in no notation system he knew. 3 rising notes, a rest 2 falling, a longer rest, then the first 3 again. He wrote R hums this every day, the same bars. Learned or composed, doesn't matter, it's his. He put his body between himself and the corridor junction, so he wasn't watching the moment itself, he heard it. The specific quality of the sound made it identifiable without vision. He stood with the wall behind him, and his hand flat against the polymer plating, and focused on the fact of the tune Ryabenko had been humming, and wrote it down in every way he could think to write it down, so he would still have it tomorrow when tomorrow was today again. When it was over, when the corridor had gone quiet in the particular way of aftermath, Soren stayed where he was for a while. The station hummed its structural hum around him. Down the corridor he could hear distantly the sounds of the evening meal cycle beginning. Dishes, voices, the rhythmic percussion of institutional food service. And then, even more distantly, the sound of Fendalros arguing with someone about the portion allocation, The same argument she had every evening, the same 3 volleys of the same exchange, the same exhausted outcome. He had heard it so many times he could have recited her lines. He knew how she'd pause before the 3rd volley, and how the pause meant she'd already calculated that she wasn't going to win this but was going to finish the argument anyway. Because finishing it was a kind of dignity, and dignity was not optional. He started walking toward the sound. "Where are you going?" Varric said, falling into step. "I want to know her name." Not Fendalros, he already had that. He meant he wanted her to tell it to him. He wanted the version that came from her, not from a document pinned to a board. They reached the meal hall as the argument was concluding. Fendalros took her reduced portion with a controlled expression and turned to find a seat, and Soren stepped slightly into her path, not blocking, just present, and said, "I'm Soren. We haven't met officially." She looked at him with the particular assessment of someone who has learned to calibrate strangers quickly. Survey crew, her eyes decided, reading his badge and build simultaneously. Not garrison, not administration. Then something else, some additional calculation she didn't share. "Dalros," she said. "Fen. How long have you been on Call Dorith?" The question landed and she answered it in the way people answer questions they're deciding how to answer. Slight pause, eyes holding steady, tone shifted toward neutral. 4 years. Before the occupation? Another pause, shorter. 2 years before, 2 years after. She looked at him with something that had moved past assessment into something more specific. "You're one of the 2 who came through secondary transit 3 weeks ago." Survey team. "That's right. You've been walking the corridors." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of data. "I've noticed you walking, different each day, but you're always looking at things, counting things." She paused. "Why are you counting things?" Soren looked at her for a moment. He thought about Dulev's hands on the latch housing, the double check. He thought about Ryabenko's tune, 3 notes up, 2 down, the same fragment repeated. He thought about what it meant to know a thing completely. Not just its shape but its weight, its particular texture of survival. "Because someone should know them," he said. She held his gaze a moment longer than he expected. Something in her face shifted. Not much, the kind of shift that only registers if you've been watching faces for 44 iterations of the same day. And then she said, "Sit down if you want." They sat. Varek sat across from them, his large, quiet presence like ballast. Fendalros ate her reduced portion with the focused efficiency of someone who does not waste food, and she told them, in the spare edited way of someone rationing information, about Call Dorith before, the staff of 43, the accident rate before the occupation and after, worse after, because the Vethfreth had reduced maintenance rotations and reclassified several structural advisories as non-critical to increase extraction output, and because the miners who knew what the reclassifications meant were not in positions that allowed them to do anything about it. Dulev and his latch housing, the engineering assessments that had been filed with Garrison administration and had received no response except the removal of the engineer who filed them. Soren wrote it all down, not because it was new. Some of it he'd pieced together already, and some of it confirmed guesses, but because she was saying it, this woman who had been here 4 years, and had absorbed 4 years of Call Dorith into herself like mineral into rock, and there was a difference between data inferred and data given. He wrote with the pad flat on the table and didn't hide it, and she watched him write without commenting. At some point, Varric said quietly, "We've been here 44 days. She looked at him, then at Soren. "The same day." "The same day," Soren said. "We don't know why. We don't know the mechanism. We've tried everything we could think of to break it." He paused. "We've stopped trying to break it." A silence. The meal hall noise continued around them, the ambient texture of communal survival. Voices at the level of people who are careful about what they say in shared spaces. The scrape of utensils, someone laughing. Not much, just a single brief note of it. The particular laugh of a joke told quietly enough that the garrison couldn't parse it. Soren had been hearing that laugh for 44 days and had never been close enough to identify who it came from. He wrote, "Laugh, knee corner, meal hall, evening, male young mid, unlocated, find." "What does it matter?" Fendalros said, not dismissive, genuinely asking if it resets if they don't remember. "I don't know yet," Soren said. "I just know that someone should know them." She looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up her canteen, empty, the ritual reversed, and set it down again with the particular care of someone who has decided something. "His name," she said, "is KL, Ryabenko. His daughter is named Mira. She's 3 years old. He shows her photograph to anyone who asks." She paused. "He showed it to me on my first week." Soren wrote, "Ryabenko, Kale, daughter, Mira, 3. First week. Then they sat together in the meal hall while the day finished dying around them. The evening brought the volunteer work cycle, the Vreth's final daily ritual of nominal consent, the request for additional output hours framed as voluntary community contribution, and accepted with the communal performance of willingness that everyone present knew was not willingness. 43 miners filed into the lower processing bay and ran the additional extraction cycle, while 2 garrison members watched from the upper platform with the patient attention of people who have no reason to be impatient. Soren and Varric stood in the line and did the work alongside the crew, because standing in the line and doing the work was the only way to be in the same space as the 43, and being in the same space was the only way to learn. He learned that the man he'd called Redbeard was named Osip, and that his quiet companion was his nephew Tolev, and that the joke Osip told every morning was apparently about a mineral extraction protocol and an administrative form, and that it was genuinely funny if you'd worked extraction for 12 years and hated administrative forms, which Tolev had and did. He learned that the woman running the secondary ore sort had a methodology she'd developed herself, off-book, that increased throughput by 11%, and that she'd stopped documenting after the garrison had responded to her first efficiency report by increasing the baseline quota. He learned that Dulev sang under his breath during the long mechanical waits, actual songs, structured, with recognizable melody, not Ryabenko's unconscious fragments, and that the songs were very old, the kind that have been in a culture so long they've lost attribution and become simply what people know. He wrote down everything he could, the pad filled. He added a second document, then a third. At 23:40 he was standing in the lower bay with 20 minutes until midnight, when Varric touched his arm and tilted his head toward the upper platform. One of the Vreth garrison members was watching them. Not the comprehensive, incurious attention of routine observation. Something different. The faceted eyes tracked specifically to Soren's pad, and then to his face, and then back to the pad in a sequence that felt like recognition of something unexpected. The garrison member made no move. The other continued its routine scan of the bay floor. Soren held the pad against his chest and met the look across 40 feet of recycled air and industrial lighting, and did not look away. He had been thinking for several iterations now about what the loop was for. The Vreth used recursion as punishment. This was documented in the fragmentary xenological literature that survived the occupation's information culls. Specific individuals looped, specific days selected for maximum dissonance. The working theory in the literature was sensory accumulation. The subject experienced the same trauma with accumulating clarity until something in the neural architecture fractured, a kind of sharpening, an infinite refinement of suffering. But he and Varric were not the subjects. They were not Kaldoreth residents. They had fallen into this day sideways, through whatever mechanism had brought them here. The transit anomaly, the cascade from the secondary dock, something the survey instruments had brushed against. And the loop had caught them incidentally, 2 extra particles in an already constrained system. The Vreth on the upper platform continued to watch him. Soren thought, it doesn't know what to do with us. We're not behaving like subjects. Subjects fracture, or they go numb, or they run the same futile interventions until the repetition breaks them. We stopped doing that, and now I'm doing this. And this act of learning the names and the tunes and the jokes and the morning rituals and the canteen-to-lips threshold gestures, this is something it hasn't modeled. He thought about what Fendalros had said. What does it matter if it resets, if they don't remember? He thought, it doesn't matter to them. It matters to me. I will remember. I will carry it. I am the one who carries it. He opened a new document on the pad and wrote Kale Ryabenko, Mira 3 years, shows photo to anyone who asks. He wrote Fendalros, 4 years, canteen at the threshold. He wrote Dulev. Double checks because he already knows and does what the margin allows. He wrote Osp Tolev, morning joke, 12 years. He wrote the woman with the efficiency method she stopped documenting. Learn her name tomorrow. He wrote Kale's tune, 3 up, 2 down. Rest. Again he looked up. The Vreth was still watching. He thought, you built this to accumulate damage, but I'm accumulating something else. He thought of every song that survived because someone kept singing it after everyone who composed it was gone. He thought of every name carved into a surface somewhere so that the fact of a life could not be made to unhappen. He thought of Dulev's double check, the small insistence of a man doing what the margin allows in a system designed to offer no margins. He thought that maybe this was what the word witness meant at its deepest level. Not observation, Not documentation, but the specific refusal to let the loop make people invisible. He thought, you can reset the day. You cannot reset what I know. At 23:58 he finished writing and lowered the pad and stood in the lower bay of Caldorth Station, with Varric beside him while around them 43 people moved through the last minutes of the evening volunteer cycle, and he looked at them one by one. Osip's red beard, Tolev's guarded, half-smile, the efficiency woman's focused economy of movement, Dulf's quiet hands, and held each face in his mind the way you hold something you're about to give to someone who needs it. At midnight, the day ended. At 1 he woke on the bunk in Bay 7, with the pad on his hand, powered and preserved, 63 documents in the local storage, and the shift bell beginning its 3 descending notes. Varric's exhale came. 4 seconds, feet on the floor. Same day, Varric said. Same day, Soren said then. I need her name, the efficiency woman. Bay floor, secondary or sort. I know who you mean. Today Varric pulled on his coveralls. Left foot first. 3 pulls on the inner tongue. All right, he said. They went through the door. Outside, the morning stream of miners was already filling the corridor. Fen Dalros passed with her canteen. Osip and Tolev walked their calibrated distance, their morning joke already exchanged, the half-smile still on Tolev's face. Down the corridor, from somewhere in the middle of the stream, came the brief, startling note of that laugh. Genuine, specific, unlocated, the laugh of a joke told below garrison threshold. And Soren stopped walking and turned toward the sound. There, Varric said quietly, tilting his chin. A man of maybe 30, dark-complexioned, with an expression that was resolving as the laugh faded, back into the habitual careful neutrality of someone who has learned when to make himself small. He was walking with 2 others, both older, and the joke had clearly been his. The 2 older men were still suppressing smiles with the practiced discipline of people who know how to enjoy something without showing too much of it. Soren fell into step 20 feet behind him. He had 47 minutes before the cageway accident. He had enough time. He thought about what he was building. Not a plan to escape, not a strategy to fix the day, but something else, something that had no word in the operational vocabulary of survey work or xenological field protocol. A record, a testament, not for the 43 who wouldn't remember it, for himself, for Varric, for the fact that some mechanism in the universe ought to track the weight of what was happening here, ought to know the names and the tunes and the morning rituals, ought to hold in permanent storage the specific human texture of lives being compressed into an occupier's loop without consent. He was thinking this when the man with the laugh slowed and looked back, not at Soren specifically, at some sound or motion behind him, and in the half-second of the look, Soren saw his face clearly. Young. Tired in the specific way of someone working far beyond what the pay desk line recorded. A scrape of something, dried grit from the secondary or sort equipment, along his left jaw that he'd missed in the morning wash. A person, precise and unrepeatable. Soren raised one hand in the nod greeting of 2 people who share a corridor regularly, and the man returned it with the automatic acknowledgement of the same. Tomorrow, which was today, he would learn his name. He would learn it and write it down, and it would join the others in the 64 documents on the pad's local storage, and then 65, and then 70. And he would know Caldorth Station the way you know the house you grew up in. Every crack and specific shadow, every sound the walls make when the temperature changes, every person's particular way of moving through the rooms. He thought, I do not know how to break this loop. I do not know if it can be broken. I do not know if the Vreth will find my pad and purge it, or if the power cell will fail, or if there is some element of the loop's mechanics I haven't found yet that will eventually use me up the way it was designed to use up the people it was built for. I do not know any of these things. I know Kale Ryabenko hums 3 notes up and 2 notes down, and he shows the photo to anyone who asks, and his daughter is 3 years old. I know Fendalros drinks from her canteen at the cageway threshold, and she goes somewhere else during the compliance meeting, and she will argue about portion allocation until the argument is finished, because finishing it is not optional. I know Dulev checks the latch housing twice. I know Osip's joke and Tolev's half-smile and the efficiency woman's off-book method that she stopped reporting, and I will learn her name today. I know the laugh from the any corner of the meal hall, and I will know his name tomorrow. I am the one who knows them. That is what I am for. In a loop designed to grind people down by isolating them in repetition until the pattern breaks them, I have chosen a different kind of repetition, the act of witnessing, accumulated, compounded daily. Not escape, Not rescue, not the bold tactical intervention that survey team training prepared me for. Just this, the stubborn, specifically human insistence on knowing who is in the room. He caught up to the man with the laugh at the cageway junction, 3 minutes before the morning shift descended, and stood beside him in the mild industrial noise of cable and counterweight and machinery calibrating itself for the day's work. "I'm Soren," he said, "survey team." The man looked at him, made the same quick assessment that everyone here had learned to make quickly. "Survey, not garrison, not administration." "Kale," the man said, "or sort." Soren wrote it down. The cageway opened. The first cage descended, Dulov's hands sure and unhurried on the mechanism, the double check completed in its sequence. Around them, the morning shift moved toward their day, the same day, moving forward through its fixed architecture of quota and accident, and compliance ritual and pay desk altercation and evening volunteer work. And Soren moved with them, not ahead, not fighting the current but inside it, present in it, carrying what he carried. On the 65th day, which was also the first, the Vreth garrison member that had watched him from the upper platform appeared in the corridor outside bunk bay 7 at 07 and stood in the doorway without speaking. Soren looked at it. The faceted eyes moved across the pad in his hand, across his face. The translation matrix was silent. The Vreth hadn't initiated, and so was Soren. He held the pad without hiding it and met the multi-lensed gaze and waited. After a long moment, the Vreth made a motion, one of the precise multi-jointed gestures that its anatomy allowed and human anatomy did not, that Soren had not seen before. In the xenological literature he'd studied before the occupation had made that literature difficult to access, certain Vreth postural configurations were identified as communicative, without translation matrix mediation. He didn't know what this one meant. He stayed very still and watched it. Then it was gone. Varric said from the upper bunk, "What was that?" "I don't know," Soren said. "Good kind of don't know or bad kind." Soren looked at the doorway for a moment. He thought about the accumulation in the pad's local storage. 65 days of names and tunes, and threshold rituals and morning jokes and efficiency methods and photographs kept on the inside of locker doors. He thought about what the Vreth had built this loop to do, and what it was doing instead. "I think," he said carefully, "it doesn't have a category for us yet." He sat up and put his feet on the floor and reached for his coveralls. He had 43 people to be present with today, and a laugh in the any corner whose name he now knew, and a mining crew going down in a cage that would fail at 11:14, and a man named Kale who would hum 3 notes up and 2 notes down on his last walk of the corridor. He had work to do. He had the only work that mattered, the work of knowing and carrying and refusing to let the loop make anyone in it less than precisely, irrevocably real. The shift bell rang its 3 descending notes. He stood up.